On a man-made island in the middle of Pearl River Delta, a hotel is being built that is designed to run without a single human employee. No front desk clerk, no housekeeper, no night manager on duty at 3 in the morning. The company behind it, a Shenzhen robotics firm called Pudu Robotics, says machines will handle check-in, luggage, cleaning, food service, and every guest request in between. And if that sounds like a gimmick to you, hold that thought, because the front desk you walk up to in almost any American hotel is running on a design that is roughly 100 years old, and it is sitting in the middle of a staffing shortage that the industry's own trade association describes as one of its biggest operational challenges. So here's what China is actually building, how the technology underneath it really works, why the gap looks so much wider than it is, and why the hardest part of all of this was never the robots. Think for a second about the last hotel you checked into. You walked through the lobby, you got in a line, you handed over a card and an ID. Someone typed for a while, someone else looked something up, and eventually you were handed a small plastic rectangle and told which elevator to take. Maybe it took 2 minutes, maybe it took 20. Marriott's own figures, cited when the company began testing new check-in technology in China, put the traditional process at around 3 minutes when there is no line at all. Now think about the physical shape of that experience: a long counter, a person standing behind it, a wall of key slots or a card encoder, a phone, a bell. That basic arrangement was standardized in American hotels in the early 20th century, and if you dropped a hotel clerk from 1925 into a Holiday Inn lobby today, the geometry of the job would be immediately familiar to them. The screens changed, the counter did not. That is not a criticism. It is a genuinely good design. It worked because it was built around a specific assumption, which is that labor is available, affordable, and reasonably stable. A hotel is one of the most labor-dense businesses that exists. Someone has to clean the room. Someone has to carry the bag. Someone has to be awake at 4 in the morning when a guest locks themselves out. For most of the 20th century, that assumption held. It is the assumption that is now under the most pressure, and the numbers behind that pressure are not speculative. They come from the American Hotel and Lodging Association's own surveys of its own members. According to AHLA's 2026 State of the Industry reporting, American hotels are projected to pay roughly $131 billion in wages and benefits this year, up from about $128 billion the year before. In the same body of reporting, around 3/4 of surveyed properties describe themselves as operating short-staffed, with the sharpest gaps in housekeeping, front desk, culinary, and maintenance. In the March 2026 AHLA survey, more than half said their properties were somewhat or severely understaffed, and rising labor costs sat at the top of the list of operational concerns. Federal labor data cited alongside that survey put job openings across the leisure and hospitality sector at roughly 969,000 as of January 2026. Turnover in hospitality runs at a level several times higher than most other industries. STR, the hotel analytics firm, has estimated that labor now consumes somewhere in the region of 1/3 of total hotel revenue of owners and operators. So the American hotel is not failing. It is straining. It is running a century-old operating model in a labor market that no longer behaves the way the model assumes. And that is the exact pressure point that a completely different set of engineers, mostly in Shenzhen, Shanghai, and Hangzhou, started attacking from a different direction entirely. Not by making the front desk more efficient, by asking whether the front desk needs to be a place where a human stands at all. Here is what has actually been announced, and it is worth being precise, because this story gets exaggerated constantly. In mid-2026, Pudu Robotics and Shenzhen Culture and Tourism Industry Development signed an agreement to build what they describe as the world's first full-scenario robot-serviced hotel. The location is West Artificial Island, one of the engineered islands built as part of the Shenzhen-Zhongshan Link, the enormous bridge and tunnel crossing that opened in the Pearl River Delta. The island itself opened in December 2025. According to reporting on the project, the property is planned at around 44 rooms, with a restaurant, and the full opening is targeted for 2027. Before that, a public trial phase is scheduled to begin in late 2026, where a limited number of rooms and robot-run services will be open to ordinary guests. The stated long-term roadmap runs toward 2030. 44 rooms. That is smaller than most airport Hampton Inns. which tells you something important about what this actually is. It is not a hotel chain, it is a demonstration platform. And the thing being demonstrated is not the robots, it is the architecture underneath them. That architecture is the part worth slowing down for, because this is where the technology genuinely diverges from anything sitting in an American hotel lobby right now. Pudu describes its approach as one brain, multiple embodiments. The plain English version is this. Instead of buying 6 different robots from 6 different vendors, each with its own control software, its own map of the building, its own scheduling logic, and its own way of failing, you build one shared intelligence layer, and then you attach different physical bodies to it. Pudu's version of that shared layer is a foundation model it calls Pudu FM 1.0, paired with an operations agent it calls Pudu Agent. Underneath it sit the bodies. A flashbot unit running an intelligent vending and delivery system so a guest can order a drink from a phone and have it arrive at the door. A Pudu T300 moving luggage from the lobby to the room. CC1 Pro and MT1 cleaning units handling floors using what the company describes as AI-based waste detection to identify what actually needs cleaning rather than running a fixed route. Service units like Bellabot Pro and Ketibot Pro, which were demonstrated at the Shenzhen launch event, serving coffee and delivering snacks. Why does the shared brain matter so much? Because of the thing that has quietly killed almost every hotel automation project of the last decade: coordination. A delivery robot that cannot talk to the elevator is a robot that waits in the lobby forever. A cleaning robot that does not know a guest has just checked out is a robot cleaning an occupied room. A vending robot that does not know the kitchen is closed is a robot that takes an order it cannot fill. Individually, each of those machines can be impressive in a demo video and useless on a Tuesday night with 90% occupancy. What Pudu is describing is a system where every machine in the building shares the same model of what is happening in the building at that moment. That is a software problem dressed up as a hardware story, and it is genuinely much harder than building the robot. It's worth being concrete about how one of these machines actually gets from a lobby to a door on the 9th floor, because the physical mechanism is less magical and more interesting than people assume. The robot is not following a painted line. It builds and continually updates a map of the building using a spinning laser sensor and a set of cameras, comparing what it sees right now against what it saw a moment ago and correcting its own estimate of where it is, dozens of times per second. Obstacles that were not on the map, a luggage cart, a housekeeping trolley, a child, get treated as temporary and routed around. The elevator is the genuinely hard part, and it is where most deployments live or die because a robot with no arms cannot press a button. So the fleet talks to the elevator controller directly over a network link, requests a car, waits for confirmation that the car is arriving and that there is space in it, rides up, and requests the doors again at the destination floor. That single integration, elevator to robot, is usually the most expensive and most negotiated part of the entire installation, and it is almost never mentioned in the promotional video. And this is not purely a paper concept, which is the part most people miss. There is already a working commercial example running in Shanghai. In late October 2025, Keenan Robotics, a Shanghai-based service robotics company, deployed a humanoid service robot called X-Man R1 at the Shangri-La Traders Hotel at Shanghai Hongqiao Airport. The robot stands at the front desk area and acts as a greeter. It speaks to arriving guests in natural language, answers questions, and hands over a welcome gift. Around it, a fleet of specialized machines handles the rest. A W3 unit does in-room delivery. An S100 high-payload unit handles luggage. A C40 handles cleaning. T10 and T3 units run food delivery inside the restaurant. Kinun describes this as the first deployment combining general-purpose and special-purpose robots in a single coordinated hotel operation. The interesting engineering detail is what is driving X-Man R1. Keenan says it runs on a model it calls KOM 2.0, which it describes as a vision language action model built for the service industry. That term is worth unpacking because it is the actual technical shift here, and almost nobody outside robotics explains it properly. For most of the history of service robots, the machine was essentially a scripted device. It had a map, it had a route, it had a set of pre-programmed responses, and anything outside that script produced either a canned apology or a freeze. A vision language action model works differently. It takes camera input and spoken input together, forms an interpretation of what is being asked and what is physically happening in front of it, and outputs an action rather than just a sentence. See, understand, act in one loop. That is why the same underlying model can be asked to greet a guest and also to notice that the guest is holding two suitcases and adjust accordingly. Keynon pairs this with a separate layer it calls Keynon Pros, which functions more like role-specific training software, teaching a given machine the skills and boundaries of a particular job. That framing, role first, machine second, is a small idea with large consequences. It means you do not ask, what can this robot do? You define the role, then you assign the body. It is the same logic that let restaurant chains scale, and it is a very different mental model from the one that produced a decade of novelty hotel robots that could do one cute thing and nothing else. Now layer on the third piece, which Americans almost never see and which has been running quietly in China for years: check-in itself. Back in 2018, Alibaba's travel platform Fliggy and the hotel systems company Shiji rolled out full facial recognition check-in across roughly 50 hotels in Hainan. The process, as described at the time, took about 30 seconds from arrival to room key issued, including payment authorization. Marriott ran a parallel pilot in China at the Hangzhou Marriott Xinjiang and the Sanya Marriott Dadonghai Bay, where guests scanned an ID, had a photo taken by the kiosk, entered contact details, and received a keycard, cutting the process from around 3 minutes to under 1. Later reporting described Movenpick planning a rollout of hundreds of smart hotels in China with facial recognition check-in and room access through a partnership with a domestic technology group. Alibaba also built its own showcase property, the Flyzoo Hotel in Hangzhou, where a roughly 1-meter-tall robot with facial recognition capability performed reception functions. So when someone says China's hotels feel 100 years ahead, what they are usually reacting to is not one invention. It is the stacking. The check-in layer, the coordination layer, and the robot layer arrived at roughly the same time, in the same buildings, in a market where a single mobile payment identity already links your booking, your ID, and your money. Each individual piece exists elsewhere. The integration does not. There is also a demand-side reason this took hold there first, and it has nothing to do with engineering. When Marriott began its facial recognition pilot in China, the company pointed to consumer research indicating that a clear majority of Chinese travelers surveyed expressed interest in using the technology at hotels. That is an unusual starting position. In most markets, the operator has to sell the guest on automation. In that one, a large share of guests were already asking for it because the same population had spent a decade doing almost everything else on a phone, paying street vendors with a scan code, boarding trains with an ID card, ordering food from a table without speaking to anyone. A robot bringing a bottle of water to your door is not a futuristic experience in that context. It is a mildly overdue one. Technology adoption almost never depends purely on whether something works. It depends on whether the surrounding habits have already made it feel normal, and in this case, they had. And the buildings themselves have been going in strange directions too, which is the part that tends to actually shock American travelers when the photos circulate. About an hour outside downtown Shanghai, in Songjiang, there is a hotel built into the wall of an abandoned rock quarry. The Intercontinental Shanghai Wonderland has 18 floors, and only 2 of them are above ground. 16 run downward along the cliff face, and the bottom 2 are underwater, sitting inside a saltwater aquarium so that a handful of suites look out into schools of fish. It has 336 rooms. The quarry is around 88 meters deep. The design came from architect Martin Jochman and his studio Jade and QA, developed by Shimao Group and managed by IHG, and it took more than a decade and reportedly around $300 million to build. National Geographic's Megastructures series named it among its architectural wonders. From above, the shape traces a yin and yang curve. It is, functionally, an inverted skyscraper, and people in the industry started calling it an earth scraper because there was no existing word for the thing. Then there is the other end of the spectrum, which is arguably more consequential and gets far less attention. Broad Group, a manufacturer based in Changsha, has spent over a decade demonstrating that a building can be treated as a manufactured product rather than a construction project. In 2012, it assembled a 30-story hotel in 15 days. In 2021, it put up a 10-story residential building in under 29 hours. In January 2024, it assembled a 26-story residential tower with more than 200 fully furnished apartments in 5 days. Each module arrives on a flatbed truck with wiring, plumbing, air conditioning, windows, and interior finishes already installed, and gets bolted into place. And the detail that matters most for hospitality specifically is that the process runs in reverse. The modules unbolt. A building assembled that way can be taken apart, trucked somewhere else, and reassembled, which turns a hotel from a permanent real estate bet into something closer to a logistics decision. If the demand moves, the building can follow it. That same manufacturing logic has produced an entire secondary industry of factory-built accommodation pods, the curved steel and glass capsules you now see scattered across scenic areas in Jiangsu, Guangdong, Shandong, and Sichuan. Fully finished units shipped on a standard truck, installed in hours without pouring a conventional foundation, complete with bathroom, climate control, and smart locks. Industry trade reporting has tracked China's prefabricated building exports climbing from somewhere around $1.5 billion a decade ago to several times that today, reaching well over 100 countries. The point is not the pods. The point is that a country that manufactures buildings can experiment with hotel formats at a speed that a country that constructs buildings simply cannot match. Quick question before we go further, because I'm curious how this lands. If you checked into a hotel tonight and there was no front desk at all, just a kiosk that scanned your face and a machine that brought your bag up, would that feel like a genuine upgrade to you, or would it feel like something important got quietly removed? Drop your answer in the comments, I read them, and if you like technology explained without the hype, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep making these. Now let's be honest about where all of this actually stands, because this is the part that most videos on this subject skip on purpose. Start with the most important precedent, and it is not a Chinese one, it is Japanese. In 2015, the Henna Hotel opened in Nagasaki Prefecture and was recognized by Guinness World Records as the world's first robot-staffed hotel. It had 243 robots, including animatronic dinosaurs at reception. By January 2019, according to reporting in the Wall Street Journal and widely covered afterward, the hotel had removed more than half of them and handed those jobs back to humans. The reasons were mundane and instructive. The in-room assistant, a small device called Churi, could not answer basic questions, including what time the neighboring theme park opened. One guest's account, widely reported at the time, described being woken repeatedly through the night because his snoring kept triggering the robot to respond. The luggage robots could not reliably handle luggage. The concierge robot could not answer questions about flights. And critically, the machines were generating more work for the human staff than they removed. That is the ghost sitting behind every robot hotel announcement since, and it is why the coordination layer matters more than the hardware. Henna did not fail because its robots were badly built. It failed because a collection of independently operating gadgets is not a system. Whether the newer architectures actually solve that, at real occupancy, with real guests who are tired and irritable and holding a screaming toddler, is a question that has not yet been answered. It cannot be answered by a launch event. It gets answered by about 18 months of ordinary operation. Second, cost. Hotel service robots are not cheap in the way consumer gadgets are cheap. Industry sourcing guides put basic lobby guide units in the region of $8,000, with full-featured concierge systems capable of check-in functions running past $30,000. Multiply that across a property and add integration work, and the payback math only closes in specific conditions: high labor cost, high turnover, high occupancy, and a building whose elevators and corridors can actually be integrated with. Existing American hotels are frequently the worst possible candidates because retrofitting a 1980s elevator bank to talk to a robot fleet is expensive and disruptive in a way that installing the same system in a new build is not. Third, and this is the one that rarely gets said clearly, the check-in half of this story does not transfer to the United States as is, and not because of technology. The Chinese facial recognition check-in systems described in that 2018 rollout worked by verifying a guest's identity against government identity records. That is a legal and regulatory environment, not an engineering achievement. The United States has no equivalent national identity verification layer available to hotels, and several states, Illinois among them, have biometric privacy statutes that make collecting and storing face data legally consequential. So the 30-second check-in that exists in Hainan is not something an American operator can simply buy. Some version of frictionless check-in is clearly coming, and mobile keys have already moved a long way in that direction. But the specific mechanism that makes the Chinese version so fast is one that American law deliberately makes harder. Whether that is a disadvantage or a protection is a genuine debate, and reasonable people land on both sides of it. Fourth, scale reality. Global market estimates put the hotel robot market at somewhere under $1 billion in 2026, with projections into the low billions by the end of the decade. More than 20,000 service robot units were reported deployed globally across hospitality and adjacent settings by 2024, with China accounting for several thousand of those in hospitality specifically. Those are meaningful numbers for a young category. They are not numbers that describe an industry that has been replaced. The overwhelming majority of hotel rooms on Earth, including in China, are still cleaned by a person with a cart. And there is a quieter limitation that almost never makes it into the coverage, which is that hotels are not clean environments in the engineering sense. They are full of edge cases, spilled drinks on carpet, doors propped open with a shoe. Guests who arrive at 2 in the morning speaking a language the system was not trained on. Wheelchairs, service animals, oversized instrument cases, a wedding party occupying the entire lobby. Every one of those is trivial for a human employee, and each one is a separate engineering problem for a machine. The gap between a system that works at 95% of guest interactions and a system that works at 99.5 is not a small refinement. It is often most of the remaining work, and it is the stretch where automation projects historically stall out. So the honest version of the headline is this: China is not 100 years ahead of the United States in hospitality technology. What China has is a set of conditions that let the technology be assembled and tested at full scale, all at once, in public. A dense domestic robotics manufacturing base, a payments and identity infrastructure already unified on a phone, a construction sector that treats buildings as manufacturable products, enormous new build hotel supply, which means fewer retrofits and more clean slates, and a policy environment actively pushing embodied AI as a strategic industry. The United States has world-class robotics research and the world's most valuable hospitality market. What it does not have is the same set of conditions for assembling all of it into one building at once. That is a difference in circumstance and structure, not a difference in decades. And the more interesting question is what happens next, because none of this technology is actually about hotels. That is just the easiest place to prove it. A hotel is the ideal testing ground for embodied AI. And if you think about it for a second, you can see why. It is an indoor, mapped, climate-controlled environment. The floor is flat, the tasks repeat, the objects are standardized, the same towels, the same trays, the same suitcases, the same doors, and crucially, the consequences of failure are small. If a robot delivers the wrong bottle of water to room 412, nobody gets hurt. That combination, structured environment plus low stakes plus enormous repetition, is exactly the training ground you would design if your real goal was to develop machines that can operate around ordinary people, which is why the same companies keep appearing in adjacent places. Kinan says it has deployed over 100,000 robots across more than 60 countries and regions in 15 years, and most of those are not in hotels. They are in restaurants, hospitals, offices, and elder care facilities. Pudu built its business in restaurants and commercial cleaning before it went after an entire hotel. The hotel is not the destination, it is the exam. Pass it, and the same foundation model with a different body goes into a hospital corridor, an airport terminal, a warehouse mezzanine, a nursing home. The shared brain is the product. Everything else is a chassis. And that reframes what these announcements actually mean. When a company says it is building a hotel with no human staff, the interesting claim is not the staffing. It is that they believe one AI system can now hold a whole building's worth of context in its head at the same time. Where the guest is, where the bag is, which room turned over, which elevator is free, what the kitchen has left. That is a claim about machine coordination, not about hospitality, and it is falsifiable in a way most AI claims are not. Either the building runs or it doesn't. Either the trial guests in late 2026 get their luggage, or they stand in a lobby complaining to a machine that does not have hands. There is also a genuine open question underneath all of it that no engineering roadmap answers, and I think it is the one worth sitting with. What exactly is a hotel selling? Because if the product is a clean bed, a working shower, and reliable Wi-Fi delivered efficiently, then automation is straightforwardly good and the direction of travel is obvious. But if part of what people are paying for is the fact that a person noticed them, that someone looked up, recognized the exhaustion, and did the small, unrequested thing that turned a bad day around, then the efficiency gain and the product loss are pointing in opposite directions. Henna's guests, when researchers analyzed hundreds of their negative reviews, kept circling back to a version of that same complaint. Not that the machines were slow, that they were absent in the moments that mattered. It's a strange thing to sit with. The hotel front desk is one of the last widely used pieces of 20th century service architecture, still operating almost exactly as designed, and it is being tested to destruction on an artificial island most people watching this will never visit. If the trial guests in late 2026 walk out satisfied, the American hotel industry will start borrowing pieces of it fast because the labor arithmetic in that ALA data leaves very little room for sentiment. If they walk out annoyed, this becomes the second henna, a well-funded and widely photographed reminder that the hard part was never the machine, it was everything around the machine. Technology like this almost never arrives the way the headlines suggest. It doesn't land as a single dramatic unveiling. It arrives as a delivery robot in one hotel, then 100, then a check-in kiosk that shaves 90 seconds off a queue, then a building that shows up on a truck. And by the time anyone notices it has happened, it has already stopped feeling remarkable, which is how you know the change was real. So here's the question I'll leave with you. The next time you check into a hotel and there's a person standing behind that counter waiting for you, ask yourself honestly what that person is actually there for. Because somewhere on an island in the Pearl River Delta, a group of engineers has decided they already know the answer, and they are about to find out in public whether they're right. What's your call? Do you think a fully automated hotel works, or do you think it quietly falls apart the first time something goes wrong? Let me know in the comments, and if you want more stories about the ordinary technology being reinvented while nobody's watching, subscribe, because that's exactly what we dig into here.